In a world divided by power and status, a dying billionaire made an unexpected request. One night, not for pleasure, but for peace. She was just a maid, or so the world thought. But in her eyes, he found what he had searched for all his life: connection, grace, humanity. This is not just a story of romance. It's a story of healing, of compassion, and of one unforgettable night that turned a goodbye into something eternal. The mansion stood silent on the edge of the forested hills, wrapped in cold marble, steel gates, and the kind of quiet that only money could buy. It was beautiful, but lifeless. Inside, behind stained glass windows and golden chandeliers, sat Richard Kensington, once the face of every major business magazine in America. He was in his late 50s now, gray curling into his once perfect dark hair, eyes shadowed by regret, not time. The rooms around him overflowed with wealth: grand paintings, leather-bound books he never read, sculptures shipped from Paris, carpets that had never felt the soles of bare feet. He had everything a man could ask for, except time. The doctor had said the words slowly, carefully, as if softening them would help. Stage 4, it's aggressive. You have maybe 6 months. 6 months. Not to build, not to travel, not to love, but to wither. To watch the empire he built become a cage of golden bars. But even deeper than the fear of death was the fear of dying alone. What was the point of money when you had no one to call your name in the dark? No hand to hold when the pain gripped your bones like fire? He used to think power would fill that hole. It hadn't. And now, when every tick of the clock sounded like a countdown, Richard realized he had lived for the wrong reasons. It was in these long hours of silence that he began to notice her. Emma. She moved quietly through the house like a breeze. Soft, warm, unnoticed by most. A simple woman in her early 20s, Emma had taken the job 2 years ago. No resume full of degrees. No stories of ambition or dreams. Just a need to work and a heart that didn't demand attention. She wasn't like the others who had come before. Maids who laughed too loudly, flirted for tips, stole glances at the gold-framed mirrors as they dusted. Emma never lingered, never asked for favors, never once tried to charm him. She simply worked. She tied her chestnut hair in a neat bun, wore long sleeves even in summer, and always looked him in the eyes when she greeted him with, "Good morning, Mr. Kensington." Never more, never less. And for 2 years, Richard had barely noticed her beyond the surface, until he got sick. Suddenly, the noise of his world faded, and Emma's presence, quiet, calm, respectful, stood out like a whisper in a storm. He began watching her, not in the way a man watches a woman for desire, but for comfort, for the strange warmth her presence brought. She reminded him of a world he had left long ago, before the boardrooms and mergers. A world of warmth, of Sunday mornings, of people who smiled without asking for anything. Emma was untouched by the poison of wealth. She didn't wear designer makeup or speak with rehearsed politeness. She didn't look at him with fear or envy. She looked at him like a person, and that unnerved him. He started asking small things. "How are you today, Emma? Did you enjoy the rain yesterday?" And her answers were always soft, polite, but distant. She never stepped beyond the line between them. He respected that. But it made him curious. What was she hiding behind those guarded eyes? Why did someone so young choose a life of quiet servitude in the mansion of a man like him? One day he saw her standing in the garden, brushing fallen petals off a marble bench. She paused, touched a red rose, and smiled. It was a simple thing, a moment. But in that moment, something shifted in Richard's heart. That smile, it wasn't for anyone. It wasn't a performance. It was hers, real. And for the first time in years, Richard felt his chest tighten, not from illness, but from something far older and deeper. He longed to know her, to talk with her like a human, not a maid. But the distance between them was like glass, clear, thin, but unbreakable. That night, Richard sat in his study, the fire crackling softly as his hand shook against his glass of bourbon. He stared at an old photo of himself on the wall. Young, strong, arrogant, A man who never believed he'd die. A man who never asked himself what really mattered. In the background, he heard her footsteps in the hallway. Soft, predictable. She was finishing her shift. She would pass by the study door in 5 seconds. He waited. The steps came closer, and then they stopped. A knock, gentle. "Mr. Kensington." Her voice, low, kind. "You left your tea in the sunroom again." He swallowed the lump in his throat. "Come in, Emma." She stepped in, holding the tray with both hands. Her eyes met his for just a second too long. He saw something in them. Compassion, not pity, not fear, compassion. And suddenly, everything he had once believed about power, pride, and pleasure felt like dust. In that moment, as Emma gently set down the tea and turned to leave, Richard realized the truth. This woman, this quiet, humble maid, was the only real thing left in his fading world. And he didn't want to die without knowing her heart. The wind whispered against the tall windows of the mansion that night, brushing the glass with soft echoes from the outside world. It was quiet, eerily quiet, the kind of stillness that comes just before something is about to change forever. Richard sat alone in the study, the heavy curtains pulled back, letting the golden glow of the garden lamps cast soft shadows across the walls. The moonlight reached in like fingers of silver, touching the deep lines in his face, lines carved by decades of ambition, years of solitude, and now, the slow approach of death. He held a framed photograph in his lap, a picture of himself from long ago, standing in front of a private jet, flanked by grinning business partners. All of them long gone, some to greed, some to betrayal, and some like him, to the painful realization that success without love is just another form of failure. His hand trembled as he set the photo down. The ticking of the antique clock above the fireplace seemed louder than usual. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound reminded him time was slipping away. It wouldn't wait, it wouldn't pause, and neither could he. He rang the bell. Down the hall, Emma paused mid-step, setting down the silverware she had just finished polishing. She looked up at the ceiling as if she could hear the emotion behind the soft chime. It was unusual for Mr. Kensington to summon her this late. Usually by now he was locked in his study with a glass of bourbon and a blanket of silence. Still, she straightened her blouse, patted down her apron, and walked toward the study with careful, respectful steps. She knocked gently. "Sir, you called for me?" "Come in, Emma." His voice, there was something different in it. Not firm, not commanding, just tired. She stepped into the dimly lit study. The fireplace crackled softly, casting an orange glow across the room. Richard sat in his armchair, hunched slightly, staring at the garden beyond the glass doors. His face looked thinner, paler. Even his eyes seemed clouded with emotion. He didn't look like a billionaire. He looked like a man unraveling. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Kensington?" she asked softly, her voice almost a whisper. He turned to her, and the sight of him made her breath hitch. There were tears in his eyes, not loud, messy ones, just quiet sadness, barely held back by the pride that had ruled his life for so long. "Yes, Emma," he said slowly. "Please sit. I need to, talk to you." She hesitated, then took the chair across from him, folding her hands in her lap. Her posture was straight, proper, but her eyes were kind. "I've been thinking a lot lately," he began, his voice hoarse, "about life, about the things I never did, and the things I regret." Emma nodded gently but said nothing. She sensed he needed to speak, to release something that had been building inside him for too long. "I never loved anyone," Richard said. "Not really. I married once, but it was for power. I had friends, but they wanted my money. I've had everything a man could buy. And yet," he swallowed hard, his voice breaking, "I've never had someone just sit with me and care without expecting anything in return." Emma blinked, her heart tightening. She had worked in his mansion for 2 years, always seeing him as distant, unreachable, a man of marble. But now he looked human, fragile. "I'm dying, Emma," he said, the words falling like a stone into the quiet room. She gasped softly. It wasn't that she hadn't noticed his growing weakness, the way he moved slower, the weight he'd lost, but to hear him say it out loud hit her like a cold wind. "I'm so sorry," she said gently, almost automatically, her hands tightening in her lap. He looked at her with eyes full of something she had never seen in him before: vulnerability, and behind it, fear. "There's one thing I want before I leave this world," he said, voice shaking. "One thing I've never asked anyone before, and it's difficult to say." Emma's heart pounded. She didn't move. She couldn't. Richard leaned forward, his hands clasped together, knuckles white. "I want to spend one night with you, Emma. Just one night. No strings, no expectations. Not because you're beautiful, which you are, or because I want something physical, but because you're the only person who's ever been real with me, the only one who treats me like a man, not a monster, not a wallet." Emma's eyes widened. Her breath caught in her throat. Of all the things he could have said, this was the last she expected. "I've watched you," he continued quickly before she could speak. "Not in a creepy way. Just, I see you. You have a light in you, Emma, a gentleness. And when I see you walking through this empty house, I realize I don't want to die without ever touching something pure, something good." Silence stretched between them like a fragile bridge. Emma's thoughts swirled. She was a virgin, not just in body, but in heart. She had never shared herself with anyone, not out of fear, but out of waiting for something that felt honest, true. And here he was, a dying man with everything to lose, asking not for her body, but for her presence, her connection, her warmth. She stood slowly, uncertain. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "I don't need an answer now," Richard replied quickly. I had to ask before it's too late." Emma looked into his eyes, saw the pain, the sincerity, the weight of 1,000 regrets, and something in her heart cracked open. He wasn't trying to possess her. He wasn't trying to use her. He was trying for once in his life to feel something human, something real. She didn't say yes. She didn't say no. She just said, "I'll think about it." And with that, she quietly turned and left the study, her heart racing faster than it ever had before. Behind her, Richard let out a breath he'd been holding for decades. Emma stood outside the heavy door of the study, her hands still trembling. The hallway, usually so calm and quiet, now felt like it was closing in on her. The walls seemed taller, the silence louder, and her thoughts, scattered, sharp, rushed through her like 1,000 voices speaking at once. She had never been so confused. Never. As she made her way back to the servants' quarters, tucked in the back wing of the mansion, her fingers absent-mindedly brushed along the wallpaper. Her steps were slow, almost dragging. Her heart thumped against her ribs, not with fear, but with the weight of something far more complex. She sat on the edge of her bed and stared at her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. The same face she saw every morning now looked different, tired, unsure, and deeply conflicted. "He's dying," the words kept echoing. She whispered them aloud just to see how they sounded. "Richard Kensington is dying." It seemed impossible. He was powerful, elegant, larger than life. And yet the way his eyes looked tonight, so lost, so hollow, told her that death had already begun its slow march through his soul. She buried her face in her hands. Why her? Why had he asked her? She wasn't glamorous. She wasn't like the women who used to fill his parties, dripping in diamonds and dressed in perfume worth more than her yearly wage. She was a maid, a girl who wore second-hand shoes and clipped coupons to buy her mother's medicine. And yet he had looked at her like she was the last pure thing in a fading world. Part of her wanted to run, to never look him in the eye again, to pretend the request had never happened. After all, how could she agree to something like that? Was she even allowed to consider it? Would it mean she was giving up her self-respect, her dignity? The world she came from taught her that a woman's value was in her principles. Her father, a quiet carpenter, used to tell her, "Emma, never give a piece of your soul to someone who doesn't cherish it." But Richard, he wasn't asking to take anything from her. In fact, his words had been full of sorrow, not desire. His voice had cracked like the old wood of the mansion's floorboards, splintering under the weight of his loneliness. He wasn't asking to use her. He was asking to be seen, to be touched, to be human again. Still, the thought of sharing something so intimate, especially as her first time, sent a ripple of fear through her. She had waited so long. She had guarded her heart, her body, with iron bars. And now she was being asked to give that up. Not for love, but for comfort. Was that wrong? Emma walked to the window of her small room and pulled back the curtain. The moon was high, full, and glowing. The same moon that watched over every soul, rich or poor, strong or weak, loved or forgotten. She leaned her forehead against the cool glass, her breath forming a small, misty circle on the pane. She had spent her entire life playing by the rules. She had never skipped school, never disrespected her mother, never chased danger. She had chosen safety over risk, modesty over attention, silence over argument. And yet, what had it brought her? A quiet life, a clean reputation, but also loneliness. She thought of Richard sitting alone in that grand study, his wealth useless against the dark tunnel ahead of him. A man who had never cried in front of anyone until tonight. She thought of the way he had said her name, not like an employer, but like a man who was drowning and reaching for the only hand he trusted. Emma closed her eyes. If she said yes, she wasn't just giving him a night. She was giving him something sacred. A moment of peace, a moment of warmth before the coldness took him for good. But if she said yes, would she wake up tomorrow and feel like something had been stolen from her? Or would she feel stronger, braver, kinder? Her heart ached. She wished someone could tell her what to do. Her mother, her father, God, anyone. But no voice came. Just the wind outside and the steady beat of her heart, asking, pleading, trying to make sense of the impossible. And then her phone buzzed. A message from her mother, miles away in their little apartment. Don't forget, love isn't always what it looks like in stories. Sometimes it's a small act of mercy that changes someone's life. Emma stared at the words, blinking back tears. Was this that kind of mercy? She wiped her face and stood slowly. Her hands still shook. Her soul still trembled. But one thing was clear. This wasn't about romance, lust, or power. This was about humanity, about reaching across a line she had always been too afraid to cross. Not to lose herself, but maybe to find a part of herself she never knew existed. Emma didn't have an answer yet, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to look for one. Not out of guilt, not out of pity, but out of something deeper. Compassion. The sun set slowly behind the Kensington estate, bathing the gardens in a soft orange glow that faded gently into twilight. As the last light disappeared, the mansion seemed to hold its breath, still and expectant. Something sacred was about to happen. Emma stood in front of her small mirror, her heart pounding in her chest. Her hands smoothed the simple blue dress she had chosen, modest, soft, and unadorned. She wore no jewelry, no perfume, just herself. Her reflection stared back at her, not a maid, not a girl lost in someone else's world, but a woman standing at the edge of something deeply human and quietly profound. Tonight wasn't about desire, it was about dignity, grace, and the gift of presence in someone's final chapter. She walked down the long hallway, the silence pressing gently against her ears. Each step echoed against the polished marble floors like a heartbeat, hers steady but uncertain. The ornate doors to Richard's private quarters loomed before her. She paused, breathed, knocked gently. "Come in," his voice called softly. She opened the door and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit by a few flickering candles. The usual sharp, cold luxury had been replaced with warmth. The heavy drapes were open, revealing the moonlight spilling onto the carpet. A record played softly in the background, an old jazz tune, full of nostalgia and longing. Richard sat on the edge of the bed, dressed in a simple sweater and pajama pants. His face looked tired but calm. His hands were folded nervously in his lap. Emma stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say, how to begin. But then Richard smiled, a real smile. not the forced, polite grin of a man used to winning. This smile was raw, grateful. "I didn't think you'd come," he said. "I didn't either," Emma replied, her voice quiet. "But I couldn't stop thinking about what you said." Richard nodded, swallowing hard. "I know it's strange, maybe even selfish, but I wanted tonight to be more than a goodbye. I wanted a memory, one real memory." Emma stepped closer, her eyes gentle. "Then let's make it one." They sat side by side, not touching, just being, together. The conversation started slow, like water trickling through cracks in stone. But soon the dam broke. Richard spoke first. He told her about his childhood, how his father worked 2 jobs, how he swore he'd never be poor again, how he built his empire from nothing but an idea and hunger. He told her about the deals he made, the people he stepped over, the nights he couldn't sleep for fear of losing it all. "I thought money would protect me," he whispered, "but it only built a wall around me." Emma listened, every word sinking deep into her heart. Then it was her turn. She told him about her mother's strength, about working 3 jobs to support them both. She shared her dreams, becoming a writer, traveling to Italy, seeing the world beyond the ones she cleaned every day. She spoke of how loneliness had always walked beside her, like a shadow she couldn't shake. For the first time, they weren't talking across a divide. They weren't billionaire and Maid. They were just 2 people, flawed, afraid, and somehow more alive than ever. Eventually, the conversation faded into silence again, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was sacred. And then gently Richard reached for her hand. His skin was cool. His grip was weak. But in that touch was a lifetime of meaning. "You don't have to stay," he said. "Not if you're unsure." But Emma shook her head. "I want to be here." With slow, respectful care, they leaned into each other, not with hunger, but with reverence. Their embrace was tender, healing, quiet. There was no rush, no performance, no expectations. Just skin against skin, heart against heart, soul meeting soul. And in that shared moment, time seemed to stop. The world outside vanished. It wasn't about losing something. It was about giving. They laid side by side afterward, Richard's head resting against her shoulder, his breathing slow but steady. The candlelight danced across their faces like a blessing. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" she asked softly. "For letting me feel like a man again. Not a name." As dawn broke, Emma quietly dressed and prepared to leave, but not before looking back at Richard, who was lying in bed, his face peaceful for the first time in a long while. She realized that the night had been more than just a final wish granted. It had been a shared moment of healing for both of them. Richard, in his frail state, had seemed to let go of the bitterness and regret that had haunted him. Emma, too, had found something within herself, an understanding that not all people, no matter their wealth or status, were immune to loneliness or pain. The experience changed both of them. Richard had found the peace he was looking for, and Emma had learned that even the most powerful men were human at their core, capable of vulnerability and need. She left the room feeling a deep sense of compassion, knowing that their shared night had meant more than either of them could have imagined. Months later, Richard passed away peacefully in his sleep. His funeral was a quiet affair, attended only by a few close friends and family. Emma, though heartbroken, felt a sense of closure. She had given him something he had never experienced in his life, a real connection with another human being. As time went on, Emma left the mansion to start a new chapter of her life. She had learned that true worth wasn't measured by money or status, but by the kindness we show one another. The world was full of people who had everything but still longed for the simple things: love, connection, and understanding. She carried with her the lesson that no matter how rich or powerful someone might be, everyone needed compassion and care. In a world often divided by wealth, race, and status, Emma had learned the value of seeing people for who they truly were: flawed, vulnerable, and human. In the end, it wasn't the wealth or the mansion that made Richard's life meaningful, but the genuine human connection he shared with Emma, a connection that transcended race, status, and even time itself.